Dear viewers, I'm George from Ireland. So in this, I'm going to ask whether Ukrainians are Russians. Are Ukrainians a type of Russian or are they a distinct nationality? Nationality is almost indefinable. Nationalities come in different shapes and sizes. No nation is eternal. Nations are all temporary. People talk about artificial nationalities. All nationalities are man-made. They don't exist in nature like rocks or the ocean or plants exist in nature or something like that. They're created sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. Some are very ancient. Egypt's identifiable for, say, over 5,000 years. South Sudan was created in 2011. So there are few, if any, hard and fast rules which are applicable to all nations. They're nations which existed, which have been long since lost to remembrance. We have nations today which one day shan't exist. Several nations can merge into one nation can split into numerous different nations, and so on. So it defies any easy or universal definition or standard. But the Ukrainian and Russian nations are certainly enmeshed, which is partly why some Russians have got a guilty conscience about this. Don't mind so much killing Syrians or Chechens and so on, but ethnic Russians think of the Ukrainians as their kith and kin in many cases. Because remember, citizens of the Russian Federation are not all ethnically Russian. They could be Kalmuk, Yakut, or whatever, some of the indigenous ethnic minorities of the Russian Federation. Or indeed, they could have immigrated to Russia from other former Soviet republics. Could be ethnically Azerbaijani or Moldovan or something like that. So the birthplace of the Russian state over 1,000 years ago was Kiev on the banks of the Dnieper, which is now the capital of Ukraine. So you can see how their histories are intertwined. And there wasn't a concept of Ukraine for some centuries after that. Then he said we should no longer be pagans. We should adopt a monotheistic religion. So he received delegations from four major religions, well, three in a sense, but two of them were different versions of Christianity, Western Christianity and Eastern Christianity. They remember there wasn't a formal split till 1054 between the two. This is about 985 he did this. Anyway, he rejected Judaism, first of all, because he didn't want circumcision or to forego eating pork. Islam, that was far too burdensome, not only circumcision and swearing off the flesh of swines, but Ramadan, well, that just killed it. And then Christianity enjoined people to fast severely in Lent, so he wasn't having that one. Orthodoxy was much more to his taste. Although I don't quite get this because Orthodox Christians are supposed to fast before Easter and before Christmas. As in there's certain things they can't eat. Hi Laura Jane, I've been to Kiev just once. Having a vegan diet. So and then he said you all got to get baptized in the Dnieper, and then Christianity was their religion. The split in 1054. Okay, they were the part of the Orthodox Church. So there was no distinctive Ukraine at that time. That really just was Russia, and Moscow was on the edge of Russia. There wasn't even a written mention of Moscow till some time after that. But then really the focal point of Russia shifted east, especially when the mighty Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth conquered what's now Ukraine and indeed Belarus. You might point out that Belarus doesn't have much of a history of nationhood, but does not say it isn't a nation state anymore. It is a nation state now. But I think that's actually Putin's next target, and they've let that slip. So then, under Polish rule, Ukraine acquired various Polish accretions and became a distinct language, shifted away from Russian. And that's what happens with languages. They evolve, they split apart, or they unite, and so on. So languages being born is as natural as language death. So then in the 17th century, the Russians were able to reconquer what became Ukraine. They didn't reconquer all of it. Some of it became part of the Habsburg Empire, like Lviv, so under Austrian rule at the end of the First World War. So you can see how they're quite enmeshed. Obviously, there are lots of Russian cognates in the Ukrainian language. There's some Russians who are very disdainful towards the Ukrainian language, claim it's not even a proper language. It's just bad Russian with various impurities. And although, yes, it's a Slavonic language, it's not to say that it's not a language. That's preposterous, nor indeed is a dialect. It's very distinct. I know it's imponderable. How different does a code have to be before it's designated a language rather than the dialect. I can't remember who quipped this one that a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. So it was often a political decision, and that's why linguists, to avoid political controversy by using the terms language or dialect, they opt for code. Um, Anyhow, so under the Tsar, Ukraine was reconquered. It was amalgamated back into the Russian Empire. But at this stage, the Ukrainians had a distinctive identity. Some of them, I would guess, content to be in the Russian Empire, or even happy. Some of them discontent and opposing it, although they were not always too vigorously. Obviously, the further west you go, the more decidedly Ukrainian they tended to feel, and people who are ethnically Russian are moving back in. So there are plenty of Russian cognates in the Ukrainian language. Other ones which are as close as makes no difference. You can just guess it's a one-word difference, and some are just plain separate. They're just totally dissimilar. Um, I mean, Polish is similar to Ukrainian, or it doesn't mean that it's part of Polish, or that Polish isn't the language, even though it shares some things in common with Russian, and so forth. So obviously the Tsarism was severely oppressive, and that was bad news. There were some Ukrainian nationalists even then, and the Ukrainian language was very much disapproved of. It was almost impossible to print the Ukrainian language. Remember the late 19th century, Tsar Alexander III saying orthodoxy, nationality, and what was the last one? Autocracy. Yeah, that was his triptych. So the Ukrainian identity was de-emphasized. They're just seen as an unusual type of Russians. And maybe some of them perceive themselves that way. I mean, if they wanted to unite with Russia, I'm not going to tell them they shouldn't do. But I realize in eastern Ukraine, it's more liminal. And I remember after the October Revolution, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin said that any of the non-Russian parts of the empire could go independent if they wanted. He'd prefer them to stay connected to Russia, politically united, but he wasn't going to force them to. And Ukraine briefly went independent. Lenin very quickly changed his mind about that and began and reconquered Ukraine. But in 1918, Ukraine was very briefly independent, even established diplomatic relations with Azerbaijan, and that was reconquered by the Soviets with great brutality. Some Ukrainians never gave up fighting for independence. When I say brutality, I don't just mean soldiers killing each other in combat. That's normal in war. That's accepted. But I mean deliberately killing civilians on a huge scale, as only communists can. And not wishing to be anti-Russian, but I'm afraid to say the Russian army has a very, very bad record of this down the centuries. I think no army is blameless on this one. Most armies have committed atrocities, but I think the Russian army is egregiously bad for the number of its atrocities, the scale of its atrocities, and the total impunity with which the perpetrators of these crimes are treated. Um, anyway, so some people like Stepan Bandera continued resisting. They fled into the forests, or they fled to Western European countries. Or there's the Holodomor in the 1930s, which I talked about before, but more Russians moving into to the east of the country, and Kiev becoming very Russian speaking, and like take Bulgakov, who was born in Kiev to Russian parents. The novelist wrote exclusively in Russian, so was he Russian or was he Ukrainian? He could be regarded as both. And even those who were fully Ukrainian sometimes spoke Russian and couldn't speak Ukrainian. And the country suffered horrifically in the Second World War, just beyond words. Very, very high death tolls. So like 25% of the population of Ukraine killed in the Second World War. That's just 4 years for them. And bearing in mind they'd had famine and massive scale purges, hundreds of thousands of people deliberately killed by the NKVD, shot dead, as well as those deliberately starved to death. Well, that's into the millions. So I don't know how anybody survived. And you think in the Second World War under German rule, the only way to survive was by collaborating with them. And then if you did that, you're going to the Gulag if you weren't shot straight away when the communist government came back in. So because so many Ukrainians were killed in the war, more Russians and other ethnicities were moved in. And that's where I realize it's questionable in the East. It's very unclear who's Ukrainian, who's Russian. So that certainly there were, sister nations, and difficult to separate them. But nations change. So are they a kind of Russian? Some of them are. Some of them are ethnically Russian, and some of them would even be Russian citizens in the East, even before this war. Apart from that, obviously, there's strong linguistic bonds, their cultural links as well. All sorts of sympathies of blood and links of blood and sympathy, and the people of mixed ethnicity and the people of Ukrainian stock living in Russia and vice versa. So I can see how that they are intermingled, um, and but none of that is the slenderest justification for Putin's illegal war of aggression. If he could persuade them to unite with Russia, I wouldn't object, you know. And people are asking this question because I said the Irish are British, reasons I've adumbrated elsewhere. But I'm not saying that there's these things are comparable. I mean, I would like us in the Republic of Ireland to voluntarily reunite with the United Kingdom. I shan't bake my breath. It might well never happen. I'm not advocating annexation. That's a completely different thing. Anyway, so those are just my musings on whether Ukrainians are Russian, and I would say largely not, though there is considerable commonality between the two nations. There is some overlap. These things are seldom clear cut. It's very difficult to delineate borders in a linguistic and cultural sense. We can't describe the distinction between one nationality and another with any microscopic accuracy. It's a humanities issue. It's not a scientific issue. These things are seldom provable 100%. Right. Thank you very much. Toodaloo.